I did not know who was coming. I said, if it's patients that can go in an ambulance, send them in an ambulance. I want to fly the patients that need to get to hospital as soon as possible.
The feeling that you're alone without any ambulances and the patient is bleeding himself and you can't do nothing.
It's actually interesting that the pilots amongst themselves were coordinating the takeoff and landing, not air control. Hi, I'm Dovie Maisel, Vice President of Operations for United Hatzalah.
And I'm Elad Bachar, the head of the medical division.
And today, again with us on board in the podcast is Avi Marcus, who is Chief of Staff for the CEO of United Hatzalah and a paramedic. You might have seen him in previous episodes of the podcast. And today, here in another episode, 4 PM of the October 7th events, going through the timeline of this most tragic day that Israel underwent. And in this series, going through step by step the unfolding events and the heroic work of the volunteers in the field. And today, we've been going through the timeline since 6:29 in the morning, and we're now at 4:00 in the afternoon when finally, our helicopters were able to take off, and we'll deep dive today in this part of the episode about the air medical unit and the airborne transports that were done, and everything that had to do with the evacuation and the efforts of this such tragic and so challenging day. So Avi, you carry multiple caps in the organization. And maybe I'll hand it over to you. And like with the other guests and volunteers, Chezi in the last hour, and Elad, and Linor, and Rachel, and everyone. Let's start from 6:28 in the morning, right before that first siren. Where did that catch you? Where did October 7th, 6:29 in the morning catch you? Give us a little bit, and then we'll, from there, try to come back to our timeline and dive in.
So 6:28, 6:29, the sirens go on. My beeper starts screaming and screeching about all kinds of shooting and other things going around. And I'm like, is this a dream? Is this true? And in a minute or two, I understand this is true. It's happening. I'm religious. I open my phone and I start seeing videos, etc., etc. And I understand we're at a war. We have to start moving things forward. As head of the psychotrauma unit, I wake up the professional psychotrauma, tell them, listen, there's something big going on. We need to start working for the psychotrauma unit to open a hotline.
And we'll have a whole episode 13 is actually dedicated to the psychotrauma efforts on October 7th. And you'll be there on that episode as well to tell us all about that with other members of the team.
But I wake up, I close my bomb shelter room I have in my house, wake up my wife, say, listen, there's war coming. There's a war. She kept on sleeping. She doesn't even remember I told it to her. I sent on the WhatsApp to my neighbors, listen, there's a war. I opened the bomb shelter for all the building and opened my laptop and started working. One of the first things I did was organizing paramedics and doctors to be on the hotline to assist our medics.
You're talking about the distant ones from up north. They can't
exactly.
really be of assistance at this point down south.
Opening a hotline to assist our medics, which are stuck with very injured people and not being able to take them to hospitals, meaning they have to do a long-term treatment and not just a touch and go.
In shelters. Explain why, in what situations, what are the situations that the volunteers actually had to undergo? This is not your typical scoop and run.
Exactly. It's a stay and play, because if you go out, you get shot. And you have dozens and hundreds of Hamas around the streets just looking for people to slaughter on the way. So our medics, paramedics, they meet these patients and they're stuck with them for hours and hours until they can even take them out in a safe way.
We already talked with Liad about it, about the feeling that you're alone without any ambulances and the patient is bleeding himself and you can't do nothing.
So the timeline goes on at around 12 o'clock in the afternoon. I drive down to Heletz, which is close to Sderot, in order to find a specific place to land our helicopters.
Our staging area, and we spoke about that. Lenore went into that in depth.
At the same time, we had hundreds of injured soldiers and civilians coming in, doing triage, deciding who needs to go to hospital straight away, who can stay, who has to go to other ambulances, and of course, trying to understand when the helicopters will land. We had one helicopter with a team. We have teams 24/7, but they were a different place, and they had to leave because they were at a place where they could not.
They were down south in the airfield that had no bomb shelters. So as soon as a missile barrage started in the morning, they had to flee and get shelter in a distant area. So I think it was at 10:30 in the morning. I told Elad to prepare the helicopters. We spoke about this. And Avi didn't explain how many caps you hold here in the organization. You've got your role, and then you're a paramedic, and you're also part of the air medical unit, an airborne paramedic, and a combat medic in the reserves of the IDF, and
psychotrauma.
And psychotrauma.
Yeah.
A real multitasker.
Yeah, I try. So I found the field. Let headquarters know we have a place to land the helicopters. One helicopter had all the equipment in it. The second one was only with stretchers. I gathered my stuff, etc. And at the end of the day, at 3:45 in the afternoon, 2 helicopters landed. I went on one of them with another paramedic. We had 2 injured soldiers. And a minute afterwards, another helicopter landed, taking 2 other very injured soldiers, taking them from where we were to the hospitals in the country.
So tell us a little bit, first of all, what it's like. This is not your typical landing, by a car accident or for a patient transport. We're talking about, we were talking with Lenore earlier and with Chezi about the missile attacks that were going on nonstop all over the place there. And obviously no shelters or anything, and you got to fly in with the helicopter there.
So it's not only that. Number one, it's war. We know we have Hamas running around, may even come to where we were. That's one aspect. The second aspect is maybe them trying to shoot a helicopter trying to land, and finding a place where a helicopter can land safely without the shooting, where there's no cables and no debris that can go into the helicopter and ruin the helicopter, and also finding a space which can be safe for ambulances to arrive at a good place where they can be...
The staging area.
Exactly, the staging area where the ambulances are safe and the helicopters are safe, and there's a good distance between them, so no one gets injured when the helicopter lands.
We need to understand that very early at the morning, the IDF closed the airspace 7 kilometers from the Gaza border. So the place that we took at Heletz, it was something like 7 kilometers from the border. This is the closest place that we can land at.
Yeah, they closed the airspace so you can land, but what's happening in the background is there constant rocket attacks, and there's no Iron Dome in these areas.
Exactly. So the pilots we use in the Airborne unit or IDF pilots, they know how to fly. They knew what to do. I can say once the helicopter landed, within a matter of a minute or 2, patients were on the helicopters. I made sure that once the helicopter touches the ground, I have patients waiting for the helicopters and not the other way around.
So you were essentially coordinating with the ground teams in the triage center by the staging area at Heletz, what patients you're getting? Do you have an idea of what patients you're getting, or
I did not know who was coming. I said, if it's patients that can go in an ambulance, send them in an ambulance. I want to fly the patients that need to get to hospital as soon as possible. Now, it's not only the ground ambulances arriving. It's letting the hospitals know we're coming, headquarters to coordinate everything. In order to land a helicopter in a hospital, it's not just you land and go. You have to have lots of coordinations together with the hospital, and you have to understand there's other helicopters flying also taking patients from the IDF, meaning you have to coordinate so many things at the same time so that when I arrive at the hospital, they know I'm coming, I can land safely. I can say that when we landed in Hadassah in Jerusalem, on the way to Hadassah, there was a big conflict. If we have to land on the top of the hospital or a further away landing space, because we didn't want to catch the landing space.
We need to remember that what Avi's saying is that the 669 Airborne unit, they had, I don't know, 5 or 6 helicopters, Blackhawks or more, that were at any given moment going up and down. And we actually knew about the vast majority of them because our teams, our volunteers on the ground were the ones that were bringing them the patients from the different areas on our ambulances and our vehicles to the staging areas, and from there to the helicopters, just like our helicopters themselves. I mean, I think at a certain point there was in Heletz on the ground, you were with one of the helicopters, and there was another 3 or 4 of the Blackhawks on the ground there, because the amount of victims that were pouring into our triage area in Heletz was simply you can't even begin to understand.
So as we landed in Hadassah, the helicopter had to bounce. We landed. We took out.
Landed on the roof.
We landed on the roof. We took out the 2 patients, and the helicopter had to move away in order to have other helicopters.
Just to literally hover in the air so they can
Exactly.
let other helicopters. Yeah, in Soroka the same thing was happening. In Soroka there were helicopters going up and down and waiting in the air to land and take off.
So the first 2 patients I took from Heletz, but then I went back to Soroka to take patients from Soroka Hospital to Hadassah. And there exactly, in order to land, there was 669 helicopters on ground. So we had, the pilots between them had to decide and who lands first, and if it's a big helicopter, small helicopter.
That's actually interesting. The pilots amongst themselves were coordinating the takeoff and landing, not air control.
Absolutely.
Wow.
They were on connection the whole time. To decide who comes before and who comes after, where to land, etc. Just in order we don't have any.
And when you arrive to Hadassah is a level A hospital in Jerusalem, very, very big hospital, one of the biggest one. You felt that there is a war 20 minutes of flying from you because it's one of the biggest hospitals in Israel.
So Soroka was a madhouse. Soroka in Beersheba was a madhouse. When I arrived in Hadassah, they had patients, but it didn't feel like war. They were ready for me. They had army people waiting for us, but it wasn't hectic like Soroka. Jerusalem was a hospital. They were ready for us.
I think that's a whole discussion in itself, and maybe even cause for a national inquiry to understand how 2 hospitals in Israel were overwhelmed with hundreds of victims, and so few of them made it by secondary triage to other hospitals. It simply doesn't make sense.
Okay. I hear you.
I guess we're talking about the pre-hospital, but that's a discussion maybe for a different podcast. But I can't seem to understand that. I mean, you've got level A hospitals in other places in Israel that are simply not getting any victims, and these hospitals, you have patients with tourniquets on them for hours, way beyond 2 hours, and
I can just tell that Soroka Hospital at Beersheba, it's southern Israel, level A hospital that was treated something like, 300 or 400 of critically injured people at October 7th, it's like
No, it's tremendous. It's admirable what they did. There's no question. They saved hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lives. I'm just looking at the bigger picture. But I guess that's a discussion for another day. Let's go back to Heletz and to Sderot and to Kfar Aza and Be'eri and the victims coming out of there. So essentially, you were on the first helicopter that landed, right? And what's the story? The second helicopter actually wasn't even prepared. Second helicopter.
Avi was at the second helicopter.
The second helicopter, but one of the helicopters was stocked and equipped and ready to go and with a team. The second helicopter was a shell. It was just a helicopter. It didn't have any equipment on it. And protocol is you got to do by protocol. You got to make sure that all the equipment is in there and everything. But we understand Elad is telling you that we have hundreds of victims here. A lot of them critically ill, and we'll talk soon about the injuries, the type of injuries, and what procedures you were able to perform there. But the decision, Elad, that you made, that telling Avi, prepare the second helicopter, have it empty for all I care. Let's get that bird in the air.
So we decided to take the second helicopter and put a pilot in it and just take off and land at Heletz. And Avi and another flight paramedic came to Heletz with their own equipment, with the monitor, the defibrillator, and the bag. And after the second helicopter landed there, they took the patients and with the patient go into the helicopter and take off to a hospital.
Yeah, we saw in the video literally carrying patients in their hands, not even on a stretcher, just to get them out of there, and out of the hot zone and onto the helicopter and out to the helicopter to the hospital. The interesting thing is, I remember when we were debriefing this. So in the aftermath, looking at the numbers and the patients, they all survived.
Absolutely,
they all survived. That's truly amazing. Talk to us a little bit about the different injuries that were. We're talking about the first two patients that were taken at 4:00 in the afternoon, 4 and 4:04. Helicopter 1 and helicopter 2 took off with patients. Talk to us a little bit about the treatments, the capabilities that we presented in the field for the treatment for these patients.
So the two patients I took were two soldiers. One was shot in the stomach, in shock. He was in shock. He was dozing off the whole time. Very low blood pressure, very high pulse. He was in shock. The other soldier was shot in his. He had a tourniquet on his shoulder. He had a gunshot in his pelvis, but he was okay. He was doing selfies on the way. Sending WhatsApp and selfies to his family to say everything's okay. Both of them monitored. The guy in shock got fluids, got all kinds of make also against pain. He was very, very much pain. Also hexacapron in order to make stop the bleed. We did not know where his bleeding was. We had big difficulty with both of them getting any more data. On the helicopter, the sound or the noise in the helicopter is so strong, you can't. So it's lots of mimics or pantomime speaking to getting data from them. Once we got to the hospital, the first guy we took out was the guy with the stomach injury, then the other soldier, and we had 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, we had to decide how severe they were. What they needed, tourniquets, yes or no, put them on, take them off, strip them off the clothes to see if there's any more injuries that no one saw. But that was like 20 minutes went through like, for me, 2 minutes.
And it felt like 2 minutes. And the other two patients that were taken, the first helicopter was critically injured. Both of them ventilate. And they took them to a level A hospital at the center of Israel, not at Jerusalem.
All gunshot wounds.
All gunshot wounds.
And they both survived. I met one of them like a month ago.
It's truly unbelievable. Actually, one of them was appointed to become a more advanced officer and whatever. And we're holding already at like 4:39 in the afternoon. And the first two helicopters are already at the hospitals, en route to the hospitals. and Elad and me were back here still and getting reports of a request for masses of support for the Shuva area. They couldn't land the helicopters there because it was too close in the parameter of the 7 kilometers.
We checked a few times with the IDF because we really wanted to land there because there was critically injured people there, but the IDF authorized only his helicopters to land there because of the missiles and the terrorists.
But they were lacking equipment on the ground. So what we did at this point was we put in the order to deploy additional mass casualty response vehicles and logistics and lighting systems and whatnot to be headed down to Shuva. Bear in mind, we're talking about 20 to 5 in the evening. We understand we're starting to go into the dark soon. Sorry, we're going to go into the dark soon and we'll need lighting systems. Battle is going on in all of the kibbutzim in the area. And we understand that this is not going to end very soon and that we need to set up like a triage site similar to what we did in Heletz. We need to do in Shuva, which is the more southern part of the area affected, and we essentially deployed the additional resources from here.
And more dangerous place, there was still terrorists next to Shuva when there was deployed their stuff there.
Yeah. There was actually still at this hour of the day, and we're talking about an incident that started at 6:29 in the morning. We're at 4:47. In the afternoon, and there's still massive amount of victims coming out
because there was still shooting going on.
From
still some
all
us
different
walking
areas.
around.
This is like, I mean, what is going on? This is something that, I mean, we've been through many different incidents. All of us have years of experience here in mass casualty incidents and whatever, but we're talking about an incident that's going on already almost 8 hours, and it's not, it's not reducing. It's simply continuing.
At night shift, we still evacuate soldiers and citizens from the kibbutz that was injured and waited, 20 hours
to be rescued. Unbelievable. I mean, 6:47, we're getting the calls back here from Heletz saying we need more helicopters here because we have some critically injured patients down there, and that's when we give you the order basically to turn around and loop back to Heletz. And this is when you start basically going back and forth for the next coming few hours. Tell us a little bit about what other patients you saw there. What did it feel like as you were coming down there after you were there for the first time, experiencing it in Heletz, understanding what was actually going on the ground. And to a certain point, when you're up in the air already, and you've flown 5 minutes, you're away from the war.
It's another country.
It's like another country.
It is a different country.
And you're in the sky and everything is nice and relaxed.
So I want to add a point that about 4:30 in the afternoon, I get a call from the army saying they want me to come.
They drafted you.
They're drafting me. And I'm like...
When you are there?
When I was in the air.
It's like called a Code 8.
So I told them, listen, I can't talk now. Everything was on WhatsApp. I said, I'm flying patients now. I'll talk to you later. Well, that's what it was. So that's just at about 4:30 in the afternoon, the army called me. I did go to the army at the end. 11:30 at night, I was in the army. Flying back, organized the helicopter, trying to think safe, not safe. It wasn't even in my thoughts if it's safe to fly or not. I know the patients need me. Flying back to the war zone or driving back to the war zone many hours later. Hectic, crazy, scary, but knowing I'm doing something important, saving lives. I took another soldier, was shot. After that, I understand he was the doctor of a very, very high-profile unit. He was shot in the morning. Took him to Hadassah also. Another guy from Shabak, also I found out he's a cousin of one of our workers, also had to fly him into a hospital. Also very severely injured, the shot in his chest and in his legs. So it's just like there wasn't too much time to even think and understand or absorb what I saw, because just like adrenaline.
Get him on the helicopter, get him out to the hospital.
Exactly.
And just going back and forth. Unbelievable. I mean, we're talking about 5:15, 5:19 in the early evening and the late afternoon. What we started thinking here, Elad, I don't know if you remember, I was telling you, it's starting to get late. The events aren't letting up. People are going to end up getting tired. We're going to need to start thinking about night shift. I mean, it doesn't look like the war is letting up, and it looks like war is breaking out. Forget the massive terror attack. We're talking about the war. And essentially we understand, okay, we need to start shifting because you're in the immediate response mechanism, except the immediate response mechanism here has been going on for 8 hours. 8 hours already.
It has to change to long term.
And now we need to start shifting to understand, first of all, that even us as managers, we'll eventually need to rest as well. That didn't really happen until the next day.
Sunday noon.
Until Sunday noon, basically. But we knew that the personnel are down on the ground, going in and out, driving kilometers over kilometers to the hospitals, transporting, going back on under fire. They're going to be exhausted. They simply won't be able to continue operations. So we started here at headquarters. We started the whole next shift.
Next shift of commanders
of responders on the ground, ambulance drivers, paramedics, doctors, EMTs, you name it, preparing them to be deployed later in the evening out and down south to take over and relieve those who were active since 6:30 in the morning.
So for me, it's a whole different story.
Tell us.
I, at 11:30 at night, was in the army, meaning I didn't get to rest even in between. I went home, took a shower, and put my uniform, my army uniform.
So you woke up at morning with the Shabbos outfit.
I was planning to go to shul, to Shabbat, put on my Shabbos clothes. I went down to Heletz at 12 o'clock in the afternoon. I put working clothes. 3:45 in the afternoon, I put on my
flight suit. And 11:30 at night, I'm on army uniform. Wow.
And no rest in between. And of course, when I went into the army, it's not I went in and went to sleep. I had to organize all my gear. So I went through 4 uniforms the same day, and then went into the army for 4 months.
Unbelievable.
So just a whole...
Unbelievable. And it hasn't ended yet. We're a year in, and it hasn't ended yet. And looking at that day, understanding that we need to start flipping the record or the disc or whatever, is that we started moving to a operation model of looking into days ahead. And our volunteer department immediately started, our immediate response was recruitment, boom, alert, everybody out. But now we need to look at days ahead. So our volunteer department started going out and recruiting volunteers and putting together shifts. We figured that the first shift relief will be sometime 7, 8 o'clock in the evening. Then again, sometime past midnight, and then night shift and moving on. And making that call actually paid off, because at the end of the day, when in certain areas were already liberated, so there was a reduction somewhat of the scale of the event. And then those who were, did 5, 6, 7, 8, 10, 15 transports to the hospitals were exhausted. And we were able to relieve them by sending teams that took over for them.
I think we talked about it at our previous episodes, but I think the listener should understand that at, 10 or 11 a.m. at October 7th, there was already something like 1,500 volunteers, EMS, paramedics, doctors of United Hatzalah that was at the southern Israel treating patients, and it's a lot of heroes.
Unbelievable.
That didn't think and run into the fire to save lives. And Chezi also talked about it, and it's You look at these people and
I mean, I said it at the beginning, and I'll say it again 100 times more. Ask me, had we would have been able to do what we did on October 7th, ask me this on October 6th, I would have said, never in a million years. But there was no one. And the ability to do that. And not only that, it didn't end there. It ended up going into an operation that went on for weeks. It went on for weeks because you got to remember that our volunteers that live down there were all evicted and evacuated with their families to other areas because it became a war zone. Yet people who stayed there needed treatment, and we put together a system of shifts around the clock, staffing the whole area to provide response. Not to talk about the humanitarian efforts, that's a whole different story. But
different episode.
Yeah, probably a different episode as well about the humanitarian efforts. But Avi, let's come back again to the helicopters and talk a little bit about what happened throughout the night and the following morning as far as the Airborne, the Air Medical Unit in United Hatzalah. Obviously, you went into the Army at 11 o'clock at night, but looking at it organizationally, what we did and what we offered the government to do, and unfortunately was not leveraged.
So at the beginning, we flew patients from war zone to hospitals. But once hospitals were packed, they needed to move from one hospital to a different hospital. We offered government to use our helicopters
and ambulances
to move patients from one place to another. My answer is what happened is most probably nothing. We got a no answer or no answer.
We're still waiting for the answers.
11 months later. But
well, we did see a colossal failure of all the major systems on October 7th. So it's not our position. I'm not here. Our podcast is not about judging the national systems and governments, but more to focus on the operations done on the ground and the heroic actions and the life-saving procedures. I mean, sorry, I cut you off. You can keep going.
Landing helicopters in a war zone are civilian helicopters. It's not the army helicopters. Only crazy people can do. Only people that improvise and understand that when it's a crazy time, do crazy things.
Oh.
And that's what we are, crazy people. We did crazy things with the helicopters. We saved lives for sure with these helicopters.
And I can say that we are the only company that our civilian helicopters land at
in a war zone.
At the war zone.
Yeah. Well, I like that line. So I think, Avi, I think that'll be the takeaway of this episode. Is you said crazy people do crazy things. I'll say that extreme situation and complicated situations require extreme thinking and thinking out of the box and finding solutions and doing what others wouldn't normally do. And I think that's the secret sauce of the volunteerism spirit in Israel, primarily, of course, volunteers of United Hatzalah, but I think it represents a lot of what happened on that day in general, is that Israeli society, the volunteer organizations in Israel, all rose to the occasion where the government systems failed, where the official systems failed. Why? Because exactly what you said. And that is the major takeaway here, is the mission needs to happen if it's complicated or extreme situations. So we'll find the extreme solution and do it. And that's my takeaway from this episode. And I want to thank you, Avi, for joining us for this episode. We'll probably see you again on episode 13, talking about the psychotrauma. Next episode, we'll be starting at 5:30 p.m., where we'll have Dr. Gensler, who was, I would say, Superman. Literally Superman. You'll hear some really, really, really tremendous heroic actions done by this one doctor who left his home in Jerusalem on early Saturday morning and saved the lives of hundreds, between triage, treating directly, and taking his own Jeep, which is equipped with a stretcher, and going into the hostile hot zones under fire and rescuing people out of there. All that in the next episode of our special series of October 7th. Don't forget to subscribe to our episode right over here. And of course, follow us on social media. Share this podcast with your friends, family, and everyone. And remember, once again, training, exercising, lessons learned, and now we've learned also that doing extreme things that need to be done during extreme situations. Thank you, Avi, and thank you guys very much.